Remember those crazy days? The 3-day work week, lines at the petrol stations, like the whole world felt like it was about to fall apart. That was Britain back in '74, and today we're going deep, deep into the February election, a real turning point. You've sent in some amazing stuff from the Rest is History podcast, and I'm really excited to dig into all this political drama with you.
Yeah, 74 really captures those anxieties, isn't it? A whole generation just like on edge. We're talking economic chaos, social unrest, and don't forget the constant threat of terrorism. It's all mixed up together in this potent brew.
So let's set the scene, shall we? Early '70s Britain, paint us a picture. What's going on that leads to this election?
Okay, imagine this. A country facing like a perfect storm of challenges. The energy crisis, global, yeah, but it hit Britain hard. Power cuts, right? The 3-day work week you mentioned, inflation going through the roof, people's savings just poof, disappearing. This feeling of like, what's next? And then, as if that's not enough, you have the violence in Northern Ireland, spilling over, reaching the mainland.
Right, that's where those IRA bombings come in, right? The podcast we have, they specifically mention the M62 attack, a coach full of, servicemen and their families. Just awful.
Absolutely devastating. 12 lives lost, many more injured. A stark reminder that, the troubles weren't just over there. It brought the conflict home in a very real, very disturbing way. It had to have an impact, on the whole political climate before the election.
So crisis, uncertainty, the backdrop to it all. Where's Edward Heath in all this? I mean, he's the prime minister. How's his government doing?
Heath, he was a complicated guy. Brilliant, some say, but also kind of distant, aloof. And his government, under fire from all sides. He tries these corporatist policies, right? Trying to control wages and prices, get the unions, businesses, everyone on the same page, manage the economy that way. It backfired big time.
Why'd it backfire, though? I mean, on paper, it sounds reasonable, right? Trying to get inflation under control.
Well, the unions, they're already feeling the pressure. Cost of living rising, their members are struggling. They see these wage restraints as, like, an attack, all their hard-won rights gone. It felt like Heath was siding with big business and the working class. They felt betrayed.
So a key part of his support, just gone, eroded. And then the energy shortages, the 3-day week.
Exactly. The whole thing just looked bad. People sitting in the dark, literally, wondering, does the government even have a clue what they're doing? There's this sense of, national decline, A once great power struggling to keep the lights on.
Ripe for discontent, then, I imagine. People looking for a change, for someone to shake things up. What about the other parties? How do they fit into all this chaos?
Well, the Liberals, led by Jeremy Thorpe, they saw their chance. They were the other guys, right? The third party. But they positioned themselves as this sensible middle ground option. We're not the conservatives. We're not Labor. We're reasonable. They talked about Europe, electoral reform, things like that, appealed to voters who were just fed up with the usual choices.
Tapping into that desire for something new, something different.
Exactly, and it worked, especially with younger voters, those who felt like neither of the big parties got them. They ended up getting nearly 20% of the vote. Huge jump for them.
Wow, so they were a force to be reckoned with, and Labor, they must have seen this as their chance to get back in the game.
Oh, absolutely. Led by Harold Wilson, he'd been prime minister before, back in the 60s. They offered a completely different vision for Britain. Their manifesto was, well, pretty left-leaning. Nationalization, more worker control over businesses, bold stuff, some might even call it radical, led by figures like Tony Benn, a real firebrand on the left.
So you have Heath's conservatism, the Liberals in the middle, and then Labor, full-on socialist vision.
And it wasn't just theory, right? Real differences in how they saw the role of government, the economy, everything.
Sounds like it would have been some heated debates, for sure. But there's another player we haven't mentioned yet. Enoch Powell. Now, he threw a real wrench into things. Remind us about him. What was his deal?
Powell, now there's a fascinating character. Conservative MP, but got kicked out in '68. That Rivers of Blood speech, very controversial, seen as racist by many. But he still had a following, especially those worried about immigration.
And in this election, he did something totally unexpected. He didn't just criticize Heath. He actually told people to vote Labor.
It was a bombshell, completely shook things up. Powell, he was dead set against Britain joining the common market, what's now the EU, and he saw Labor's promise of a referendum as the only way out. He was willing to put aside everything he disagreed with Labor on just to get that referendum.
Oh, the Conservatives must have been reeling.
Oh, they were. It added a whole new layer of complexity. You've got this prominent conservative figure seemingly siding with the opposition. Shows you just how fractured the political landscape had become.
All this against the backdrop of a struggling economy, social unrest, terrorism. What a time to be alive, huh? So tell us, how did the election actually go down? What happened? What were the results?
Well, it was a close one, really close. The Conservatives, they actually won the popular vote, but only just. But when it came to seats in Parliament, Labour came out on top. But neither of them got enough for a majority. It was a hung parliament.
A hung parliament. So no clear winner. What happens then?
Well, it throws the country into this political limbo. It becomes all about negotiation. Who can build a coalition? The party with the most seats, they get to try first. But they need to find allies, make deals to get that magic number for a majority.
So Heath, even though he didn't win outright, he still had a chance to stay in power.
Exactly. And his hopes rested on the Liberals. They'd done really well, remember? They were the moderate alternative. Heath saw them as his ticket to survival.
But the Liberals, with Thorpe leading them, they weren't exactly known for playing by the rules. The podcast, they mentioned he even had this elaborate escape plan just to meet with Heath.
Oh, yeah, the whole Wellies incident. Classic Thorpe, you know. Bit of a showman. He was at his place in Devon, and to avoid the press, he snuck out in his Wellies, took a secret train to London.
Amazing. It's those little details that make history come alive. So Thorpe goes to London, meets Heath. What were the sticking points? What did the Liberals want?
Well, they knew they had the upper hand, right? They weren't just going to prop up a conservative government for nothing. Their big demand was electoral reform. They wanted to scrap the first-past-the-post system. They felt like it always worked against them. They wanted proportional representation instead.
Can you explain that for our listeners? What's proportional representation and why did the Liberals care so much?
Sure, so in first-past-the-post, like Britain has, whoever gets the most votes in a district, they win. Even if they don't get more than half the votes overall. It favors the big parties, right? You can win tons of seats without winning the popular vote. Proportional representation, it's different. It tries to match the seats in Parliament to the percentage of votes each party gets. So smaller parties, like the Liberals, they'd have more power. That's what Thorpe was after.
So a huge change to how British democracy worked.
Huge, yeah, and it was a deal breaker. The Conservatives, a lot of them saw this as a slippery slope. Electoral reform leading to weak governments, chaos. They argued it'd be impossible to govern effectively.
So a real clash of principles, both sides digging in. Did the coalition talks just fall apart then?
They did, but not without some drama. Apparently, lots of shouting, accusations, rumors of secret deals. It was messy, and in the end, it went nowhere.
So Heath's gamble, it didn't pay off. He couldn't get the support he needed. Had to resign.
It was a humiliating defeat for him. He tried to hold on, play hardball, but it backfired. And it opened the door for Harold Wilson and Labour.
You mentioned earlier that Wilson, he thought he was going to lose. He even had his own escape plan, right?
Yeah.
Where was he during all this?
He was basically hiding out at his farmhouse, waiting to see what would happen. He even told his people to get ready for a long time in opposition. Can you imagine his surprise when he gets the news? Heath resigns, and they want him to form a government.
That's politics for you. Unpredictable.
Exactly. 1 minute you're planning your exit, the next you're on the phone with the Queen. What a roller coaster.
So he's back in Downing Street, but not with a strong mandate, right? Still a minority government, facing a divided country, a mountain of problems.
You got it, and those challenges were huge. Economy in a mess, inflation out of control, industrial unrest still simmering. Plus, he had to manage his own party, Labour. They had a wide range of views, moderates, socialists, everyone. Keeping them all together, that was going to be a constant battle.
Sounds like he walked into a pressure cooker. What were his first moves? What did he do to try and fix things?
Well, first things first, the economy. He tries to bring some stability, negotiates a new deal with the unions, a social contract, some concessions on wages, in return for the government tackling inflation and protecting jobs. It was a tightrope walk, keeping the unions happy, but also reassuring businesses and the markets.
And what about Europe? That was a big reason why Powell supported Labour, right? Did Wilson deliver on that referendum promise?
He did, in '75. A referendum on whether Britain should stay in the European Economic Community, what we now call the EU. It was a risk, and it was close, but in the end, people voted to stay in. A big win for Wilson helped to solidify his position.
So he managed those early challenges, but his second term wasn't exactly smooth sailing, was it?
No, not at all. He still had economic problems, more strikes, and people were getting disillusioned. The '74 election, it brought Labour back, but it didn't magically solve all the underlying issues. Those problems, they just kept festering, and things would get even more turbulent in the years that followed.
It's amazing how one election can expose all the cracks in society, all the anxieties, the divisions. So thinking back on this 1974 election, What are the key takeaways? Why is it such a crucial moment in British history?
Well, I think it marks the end of an era. The post-war consensus, that period of stability, shared prosperity, it was over.
A turning point, a shift in the political landscape.
Exactly. The old rules, they didn't apply anymore. The two-party system, it was starting to break down. New voices, new ideas, challenging the status quo. And the problems facing the country, economic, social, they are more complex than people realized.
Makes you wonder if there are parallels to today, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're in a time of big changes too, lots of uncertainty, populism on the rise, economic worries, people questioning everything, wondering if the old systems even work anymore.
It's an interesting comparison. We're seeing that same kind of fragmentation, distrust in institutions, the old left-right divide blurring. Just like in the 70s, we're dealing with the effects of globalization, technology, demographic shifting. It creates anxiety, uncertainty, and it all spills over into politics.
It's like history's giving us a little nudge,
Ah.
reminding us that these times of upheaval, as scary as they can be, they can also be opportunities.
Yeah, a chance to rethink things, to find new ways of doing things. The 74 election, for all the chaos, it opened up new possibilities, forced the establishment to face reality, and it made room for new ideas, new voices. Who knows, maybe the problems we face today will also lead to something positive.
It's something to think about, that's for sure. As we deal with all the complexities of our own time, maybe we can learn from those who went through it back then.
Absolutely. History is full of warnings, but also stories of resilience, adaptation, and in the end, progress. By studying those stories, learning from the past, maybe we can find a better way forward.
It's been a fantastic journey back to 74. Thanks to our listener for sharing these awesome sources with us. We've only just scratched the surface, but hopefully this deep dive has given you some new insights.
It's been great exploring this with you, and if anyone wants to learn more, we've got links to some great resources in the show notes. There's a whole world of information out there just waiting to be discovered.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the 1974 UK election. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning from the past.
And remember, the past is never truly past. It shapes who we are and the choices we make today.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How history can offer these echoes, these glimpses into our own present. As we wrap up this deep dive into the 1974 election, I keep coming back to that idea of uncertainty, the sense that the ground was shifting beneath everyone's feet. Did people at the time realize how pivotal this moment was? Did they understand that the old rules of politics were changing?
I think there was a growing awareness that things were different, yeah. The old certainties were like crumbling, the economic shocks of the early 70s, the oil crisis, inflation, they shattered that sense of stability from the post-war era. And politically, you had these new forces emerging, the Liberals, challenging the two main parties. So yeah, I think there was this unease, a feeling that Britain was at a crossroads.
And this election, with the hung parliament, all the political maneuvering, it just amplified that feeling, didn't it? Threw everything up in the air.
Absolutely. Neither Labour nor the Conservatives getting a clear majority, it was a sign, right? The old ways weren't working anymore. And Heath failing to form a coalition with the Liberals, it showed that even the traditional alliances were breaking down. It was a moment of, like, profound instability, and it set the stage for years of political volatility.
And we're still feeling those ripples today, aren't we? The political landscape more fragmented than ever. The old left-right divide, it's almost irrelevant, this widespread distrust of institutions, of authority.
It's a very different world from 1974, but I see the parallels too. We're grappling with these massive changes, economic, social, globalization, technology, demographic shifting. Just like in the 70s, it creates anxiety, uncertainty, and it all feeds into our politics.
It's almost as if history is giving us a nudge, reminding us that these turbulent times, as unsettling as they are, they can also be opportunities.
I like that. Yeah, opportunities. The 1974 election, all the chaos, the drama, it opened up new possibilities, forced the political establishment to confront the fact that the old ways weren't working, created space for new ideas, new voices. Maybe the challenges we face today will lead to something similar.
Food for thought, for sure. As we navigate our own complex world, maybe there are lessons to be learned from those who lived through those turbulent times in Britain.
Definitely. History is full of cautionary tales, but also stories of resilience, adaptation, and ultimately progress. By studying those stories, understanding the mistakes and the triumphs of the past, we might be able to chart a better course for ourselves.
It's been a fascinating journey back to 1974. A big thank you to our listener for sharing these fantastic sources with us. We've only scratched the surface of this complex and fascinating period, But hopefully this deep dive has sparked some new insights, maybe even some new questions.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you. And for those who are eager to learn more, I encourage you to check out the resources we've linked in the show notes. There's a wealth of information out there just waiting to be discovered.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning from the past.
Labor ended up winning the most seats, but they fell short of a majority.
Ah, so not enough to govern on their own.
Exactly.
So what happens then?
Well, he actually tried to form a coalition,
With the Liberals?
Right, with the Liberals, but it didn't work out.
Why not? What happened?
Well, there were a few reasons. One of the big sticking points was electoral reform.
Ah, right. The Liberals were big on that, weren't they?
Yeah, they wanted to change the voting system, move away from first past the post.
Can you quickly remind our listener what that means? First past the post?
Yeah, so basically it's like a horse race.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever gets the most votes in a constituency wins, even if they don't get a majority of the total votes.
Right, I get it.
And the Liberals, they felt like this system was, unfair to them.
Because it favors the bigger parties.
Exactly, yeah. They wanted a system of proportional representation, which would give them more seats based on their share of the vote.
And the conservatives, they weren't keen on that, I imagine.
No, not at all. They argued that it would lead to, weak, unstable governments.
So basically the coalition talks collapsed because they couldn't agree on this fundamental issue of how the country should be run, how votes should be counted, all that.
Right, it was a pretty big deal. And ultimately it led to Heath's downfall. He had to resign.
So Heath's out. Who's in?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Harold Wilson, the Labor leader, he actually thought he was going to lose the election.
Really?
Yeah, he was so convinced he was going to lose that he'd already made plans to essentially escape.
Escaped? What do you mean escape?
Well, he had this plan to retreat to his farmhouse in the countryside, avoid the press, the whole 9 yards.
So he's planning his escape, and then suddenly he's the prime minister again.
It's a pretty remarkable turnaround. He comes back to Downing Street, but he's still leading a minority government.
Still a precarious position to be in.
Oh, absolutely. He's facing the same challenges that brought down Heath. The economic crisis, the strikes, the divisions within his own party.
So what does he do? How does he try to tackle these problems?
Well, one of his first moves was to try to stabilize the economy. He negotiated a new agreement with the trade unions.
Another social contract.
Yeah, sort of. It involved some limits on wage increases in exchange for government action on inflation and job protection.
A tough balancing act, I imagine. Trying to keep everyone happy.
It was, and it didn't always work. But he also followed through on Labor's promise to hold a referendum on Europe.
Ah, right. That was a key issue for Enoch Powell, wasn't it?
Exactly. And in 1975, the British people voted to stay in the European Economic Community.
So Wilson managed to navigate those early challenges, but I imagine his second term wasn't all smooth sailing.
No, not at all. The economic problems persisted, there were more strikes, and there was a growing sense of disillusionment among voters.
So even though the 1974 election brought Labor back to power, it didn't really solve the underlying problems facing Britain.
That's right. Those problems would continue to cause trouble for years to come.
It's amazing to see how one election can reveal so much about a society, about the anxieties and divisions people are facing.
It's a snapshot of a moment in time, but it also has these long-lasting repercussions.
Absolutely. It's amazing to see how one election can reveal so much about a society, about the anxieties and divisions people are facing.
It's a snapshot of a moment in time, but it also has these long-lasting repercussions,
Absolutely. So thinking back on this 1974 election, what are the key takeaways? Why is it such a crucial moment in British history?
Well, I think for me it marks the end of an era, the post-war consensus, that period of stability, shared prosperity, it was over.
A turning point then. A shift in the political landscape.
Exactly. The old rules, they didn't apply anymore. The two-party system, it was starting to break down new voices, new ideas, challenging the status quo. And the problems facing the country, the economic, social problems, they were more complex than people realized, I think.
It makes you wonder if there are parallels to today, doesn't it? We're in a time of big changes, too. Lots of uncertainty. Populism on the rise, economic worries, people questioning everything. Wondering if the old systems even work anymore.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison for sure. We're seeing that same kind of fragmentation, distrust in institutions, the old left-right divide. It's almost irrelevant now.
It's like history's giving us a little nudge, you know, reminding us that these times of upheaval as scary as they can also be opportunities.
Right, opportunities to rethink things, find new ways of doing things. The 74 election, with all the chaos, the drama, it opened up new possibilities, forced the establishment to face reality, and it made room for new ideas, new voices. Who knows, maybe the problems we face today will also lead to something positive.
It's definitely something to think about as we try to navigate our own complex world. Maybe there are lessons to be learned from those who went through those turbulent times in Britain.
Absolutely. History's full of warnings, but also stories of resilience, adaptation, and in the end, progress. By studying those stories, understanding the mistakes and the triumphs of the past, maybe, just maybe, we can chart a better course for ourselves.
It's been a truly fascinating journey back to 74, and a big thank you to our listeners for sharing these incredible sources with us. We've only scratched the surface of this complex and fascinating period, but hopefully this deep dive has sparked some new insights, maybe even some new questions.
It's been a real pleasure exploring this with you. And for anyone who wants to delve deeper, we've got links to some great resources in the show notes. There's a wealth of information out there just waiting to be discovered.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning from the past.
Yeah, and remember, the past is never truly past. It shapes who we are and the choices we make today.
Couldn't have said it better for myself. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another Deep Dive.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.